Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Eugene's July 25th, 2025 program, Finding Imperfect Allies, the Future of DEI. My name is Thomas Hura. I serve as president of City Club, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another of the many forums we've held since 1990 in the name of our mission to build community vision through open inquiry. City Club is lucky to be a trusted, open, and independent voice for Eugene area community members to be heard. And as a lifelong Eugenian myself, I dare say the community is lucky to have the City Club and to hear from our program guests and questions from the audience, whether here in the beautiful Wow Hall or online or over the radio. We believe these kinds of gatherings around critical community topics strengthen our understanding of one another and ultimately our ability to support the community building work in so many sectors of Eugene. In today's fractured information landscape, we want to be a space where you can participate in unearthing, disseminating, and sharing relevant information in conversation together. We would love for you to browse our past programs at cityclubofeugene.org or our YouTube or Facebook. Do consider becoming a member if you'd like to support our work as the only city club in Oregon that meets weekly. There are many ways to support and collaborate with us, and I'd like to thank our Platinum and Diamond community sponsors. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. Thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. And a special acknowledgement of our most recent Sapphire sponsor, Summit Bank. We're proud to do our banking at Summit, and we're grateful for the contributions of Summit's employees to our club and community. As a special shout out today, I also want to acknowledge somebody who has put in so many hours to make our program sound so good on the radio, on KLCC, and that is our audio editor, Tom Gillies. Thank you for being here, Tom. Really, really need your help. Thank you. We rely so much on folks like Tom. Thank you so much. A quick reminder to silence all cell phones in the hall. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to the coordinator of today's program, Fabio Andrade.
Thanks, Thomas. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this program on Finding Imperfect Allies, the Future of DEI. My name is Fabio Andrade. I'm a member of the City Club Program Committee. I'll present a brief introduction about the topic we'll be covering today and then invite our speakers to join us. In his first week in office, President Trump signed executive orders which direct federal agencies to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, initiatives, including affirmative action programs and efforts that support women and minorities. The orders also require federal contractors to confirm that they do not run DEI programs that could be considered discriminatory under federal law. As part of this anti-DEI effort, the Trump administration has suspended grants to local governments and nonprofit organizations, targeted policies that support transgender people, and pressured universities, school districts, and private companies to discontinue their DEI work. Major corporations like Target, Ford, and McDonald's have responded by scaling back or suspending their DEI programs. In Oregon, federal grants to some government agencies have been suspended due to their DEI work. Refusal to collaborate with immigration enforcement, which is illegal in Oregon, or misalignment with new federal priorities. In response, several universities, school districts, and public agencies in the state have filed lawsuits to protect critical funding. The long-term consequences of these executive orders and federal pressure against DEI work remain unclear. Today, we welcome Dr. Remy Callalan, Assistant Superintendent at the Bethel School District, and Anna Lardner, social worker and local organizer, to explore how these DEI, anti-DEI efforts are affecting our local community, and what we can do to continue supporting each other, especially the historically marginalized groups. And with that, we are going to hear first from Dr. Remy Callalan, and then Anna Lardner, and then we come back for our Q&A.
this. Can you hear me okay? I'm not sure who, yep, okay, good, thank you. So, I feel like I should step on my toes. Thank you for the introduction. I'm glad to be here, be a part of this conversation. And yes, I work in Bethel School District. I don't know that I represent all K-12 education in Oregon, but I will speak to our experience and kind of our approach. But I also just want to say, we don't do this work alone. I think we have state level partners, we have local partners, we have lots of educational organizations around the state. We're all in conversation together trying to navigate this, the curveballs that we're getting and sort of the trickle down from the federal government. But I also want to recognize, and I think Fabio spoke to this, there is some tension that for K-12 public education regarding federal policies and what Oregon is requiring us to do. That said, we're not powerless in this work. And I think there's lots of opportunity, at least in our experience in Bethel School District, to continue to do the work. And I also just want to provide some context. Within the federal funding that we receive, it is a small, for most school districts, and there are even some school districts who actually don't accept federal dollars in the form of like title dollars, title funding to support English learners or to support struggling readers. Sometimes they don't accept those federal dollars, but in the context of our school district budget, it's a small percentage. Yet, those dollars are meaningful because, again, they do target some of our most vulnerable learners. And so if those dollars were to go away, that would be an overall challenge for school districts. I will say, though, there are federal dollars that affect nutrition services, that affect transportation, that affect other aspects of education that if those were to be restricted, those would be significant for every school district because we currently provide free meals, breakfast and lunch to all students regardless of income level. We just don't, it's a community eligibility program. We support them, but that comes with some dollars that we get, and if that were to go away, that would be a change in practice. So those pressures do exist that are related to those federal dollars, and that's, to us, that's part of equity work. And so I think when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, those are great words, and there's lots of stances we could take, and there's lots of statements we could make, and I think that's probably one of the tension points is about when we make a statement and when we don't. However, we still, in Bethel, and I think for most school districts, it's equity in action. How do we embed those actions and those strategies within our school district without having to say it's a diversity program? Because I will say this, K-12 public education, it is access for all students, regardless of who those students are and where those families come from. That is equity in action, period. And our mission statement is creating relevant, responsive, and joyful learning environments where all students thrive. Equity's not in there, but that is absolutely about equity work. It is about us thinking about, it's really thinking about, well, what does every student need to thrive? What does it mean to create a relevant and responsive and joyful learning environment for all students? And so there's a lot, again, it is a hard time to be sometimes in education because of the tensions that exist with the federal policies and state policies, but we're not powerless in our work. And so we, as a school district in Bethel, we find our strength in that. We find our strength in the communities that are coming together to support our students and our families. So with all that said, I have some talking points I'll go through. So I talked about our mission statement, and their equity isn't in there, but what that also means, though, when we think about students coming in and having a relevant and responsive and joyful learning environment, that might mean that we're creating affinity groups. Now, the federal government or the federal policies may say you can't have affinity groups for certain students. But our state government says, no, we need to do everything we can. We have gender-inclusive policies. We have anti-bullying policies. We have racial justice policies. We have all those policies in place that are coming from the state level. We're obligated to serve those students. We are obligated to provide those supports. And within the context of K-12 education, we have flexibility to think of different ways of supporting those students. That being affinity groups, and again, those are open to all students, so they can meet specific needs, and as long as they're open to all students, we're not in violation of any federal or state policy. And so that's, again, where is that area, where's that room that we can continue to navigate and support students, and then incorporate equity into our practices. So Fabio mentioned about affirmative action. Sure, there's some pressures on affirmative action and how we are recruiting and what are we counting toward qualifications. In Oregon, we have a state law that requires us to recruit and retain staff who reflect our students. So our students are 50% bilingual, bicultural, BIPOC students. So, and our staff in general are not. So we're, again, obligated to recruit in a way that reflects the needs of our students. And we also recognize when we have staff who reflect the experiences, the language, the backgrounds of our students, they're more likely to have a relevant, responsive, and joyful learning experience in our schools. So again, that navigating that tension. We also in school districts have the opportunity to do anti-bullying work, right? Like that's, again, students can't come to school and can't, well, I shouldn't say they can't. They can, they may experience some things, but they can come to school. But again, we want them to feel welcomed. We want them to feel included. We want them to feel like they belong. Part of that means staff have to be trained to know when to interrupt. Staff have to be trained to know when and how to incorporate the background experiences of our students into the curriculum, into their learning. That's how it becomes relevant to them. It'd be really challenging to talk about, it'd be really challenging for students to talk about content without talking about the experiences that exist, that they have. It makes it more relevant. They can connect to the content better when it reflects their background. So there are other, and I think part of that training also means like the interrupting when we know students are struggling, whether that's internally, whether that's external pressures, we are again obligated. They can't access their education when their brains, when they are preoccupied with something that exists outside of the school. So we again are obligated, in my mind, as K-12 educators, to figure out what it is that they need so that they can engage in their learning. So does that mean that then they're experiencing, it could be like if they are struggling with like what they're hearing in the news around that's something that reflects their identities. I could think about all the ICE the immigration activity that's going on. That is very distracting for a large portion of our students and our families. So what can we do? What do we do as educators to address that? Part of that is making a statement saying, hey, we know this exists. We welcome all students. We don't require birth certificates. We don't require that somebody check a box. We don't track this information about who does or does not have legal documents to be in this country. What we do recognize and respect that they have a culture and a family, and that we do recognize they have the experiences. And so we provide support for those students through staff training. Here are resources for you as a staff. When you hear a family express this or a student talk about worries or concerns about their family members or about themselves, here are some phrases you can say. Here's our health center where you can refer them to. Here are resources in the community. So again, equipping our staff to be able to respond to those situations. That is equity work. We don't necessarily have to call it that, but that is equity work, because that is helping our staff support students and their families so they can come to school and they can learn. That is our primary responsibility for those students. And then I think I also just want to sort of say that, and I love this idea of imperfect allies, because we are an imperfect ally to our communities. Sometimes we may take a stance as a district because this is who we are, this is what we believe in terms of our work and how we serve our community and our students. And I think that's the sort of what the latest federal policies have caused us to do, is not to say, how do we redefine diversity? How do we redefine equity? It caused us to sit back and say, who are we as a district and how are we gonna serve our community? Like, what are our practices, and our principles? And not necessarily get stuck on how do we really then redefine diversity and equity so that it passes muster and it doesn't get caught somewhere in some trap, because we know that there's some bot out there that's probably doing that. So we have that. But I think that this idea, though, of imperfect ally, though, means, though, that there may be times where a group, a segment, and again, it's no monolithic communities of color. Like, there's really lots of diverse perspectives and experiences, even with, like, what we would think a singular identity, right? Like our Latino families. Some may want us to step out and say, no, we really need you to take a stance on sanctuary. We really need you to take a stance on something. And as an imperfect ally, we have to think about how we take that stance, because there's others who have expressed to us, please don't draw more attention to this matter. Please just create a safe learning environment for our student. Please don't bring this up with our student. Like, and so again, we're an imperfect ally in that work, because we may take a stance in some ways, may not in others, and it's fluid. We're navigating that, always centering students and their experiences in that conversation. And then I think about our partners out there as well, because we have lots of community partners. Again, imperfect allies. They may not agree on some of our policies and stances in some areas, but they may agree in others, and that's okay. That's okay, because we really need our community of partners to help us do this work and really support our students and our families. And so we don't press on, you have to believe everything that we believe, right? Like that, we're not saying that. In order for you to be a partner with us, we're not. But we are strategic in how we meet with our community partners and bring them along. Fully knowing, though, that we have our guiding principles and our values and our mission statement, which is creating relevant, responsive, and joyful learning environments where all students thrive. And that's at our core. So, thank you.
I'm the tall one. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for those words. Those were really kind of great at grounding us in this conversation. Thank you to City Club for holding this space, and thank you to Fabio for the great introductions. My name is Anna Lardner. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a transgender woman who is a social worker here in Lane County. My paid job is as a therapist who provides gender-affirming care to both young people and adults. And then I'm also a community activist who, contrary to the popular myth, is decidedly unpaid. I would love to meet these paid protesters because I could use some of that right now. In that capacity as a community activist, I am an organizer with the Trans Alliance of Lane County. I was the March and Rally Coordinator for Eugene and Springfield Pride. I'm also one of the leads for the Rainbow Guard, which is a community defense organization that focuses on the trans and immigrant events around our community. I love this concept of imperfect allies. I'm not sure if I was the first person who talked to Fabio about this, but I know that we had talked about this before. I had made a comment back on a Human Rights Commission panel in December of 2024, I think it was December 14th, and I talked about how a mentor figure of mine had introduced me to this idea of holding space and bridging gaps for imperfect allies to help marginalized groups in their struggles. And I tie this to another concept, which is one that we heard a lot about with the Bethel School Districts with young people, but it's going to come up when I talk about the work that I do as an activist in the community, which is that of belonging. Belonging in a space, and belonging in a space among imperfect allies. I want to come at this from two different perspectives. The first is sort of more of a personal anecdote about my own story and how this can impact individuals personally. And then I also want to talk about it more systemically, how it relates to local government and community activism. From a personal standpoint, I used to work for Lane County in parole and probation. I worked with domestic violence clients in the parole and probation unit. And I came out as transgender in that job about, I want to say 4 years into my work there. And that was a very difficult transition to make. Human resources and leadership were very supportive and did a lot of things that they could do to try and make me feel that sense of belonging. But they hadn't done the work before. They were reactive and not proactive, and that would ultimately create some challenges for me. But what I did find, which I was very, very pleased to find, was a lot of people that I worked alongside who were not very well versed in transgender history and what it means to be a trans person. Those were imperfect allies who may have made mistakes and has implemented a lot of policies specifically around transgender individuals who come out on the job, as well as how to interact with transgender members of the community. But again, reactive and not proactive, work that was done after the fact and not before. I tell this story to talk about some of the costs, both to individuals but also organizations, that happen when imperfect allies are not enough and that culture of belonging is not cultivated across the entire organization. For imperfect allies, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to try and get everything right. And I remember in my initial email that I sent out when I came out to the agency, I said that people are going to make mistakes and we're going to work through that together and we're going to have some grace for that. And at the same time, after 1.5 years of that, that grace became too much for me and became a toll on me and a toll on other transgender people that we were working with in the client population. And that represented a significant organizational cost. In addition to losing me, they also had challenges with implementing new policies. There were lots of trainings that had to happen. There were internal rifts that were formed. And all of this could have been prevented with that culture of belonging and better work with imperfect allies up front. And that's kind of the cost of when this work is not done well. And I bring this up because although a lot of folks are not necessarily on board with DEI from an ideological standpoint, which imperfect allies, I'm willing to acknowledge that people don't always acknowledge the value of DEI up front. We can acknowledge that DEI, when framed in ways that helps build belonging and helps foster imperfect allies, that's a way to make organizations work. That's a way to make communities work well together. And that's my segue to talking about local government work and also community activism. The LGBTQ plus community, and I'm going to use that term LGBTQ plus or the queer community just as a shorthand for all the many different identities that are represented there. Also, as a trans woman, I don't speak for all trans women. I love that quote about how minorities and marginalized groups are not a monolith. Although transgender folks make up around 1%, a little less than 1% of the population, we still represent a huge range of experiences and intersectional identities. So I only speak for my own experiences. I don't necessarily speak for those of others. That being said, though, the LGBTQ plus community has historically relied on imperfect allies as a way of building alliances to achieve important goals. Historically, I'm reminded of Stonewall. Stonewall is kind of an overused example in the LGBTQ plus community, and it's a very important one that a lot of folks know, which makes it accessible. One of the challenges that came around Stonewall was the extreme prevalence in New York City, as well as other places, of police raids on bars and venues that catered to the queer community. And a variety of different groups came together against this. represented among those groups were trans people like myself, although some of those people would not have called themselves trans. They didn't have those terms. They used different terms. We're thinking of Marsha P. Johnson. We're thinking of Sylvia Rivera, activists like that who inhabited lots of different identities. And these activists, Sylvia and Marsha in particular, they ended up forming a group called STAR. Was that the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, I think. And STAR ended up allying with some of the more conservative pro-gay right organizations like Nacho and Mattachine and Urco and others around some of these issues, even though transvestites, transsexuals, street queens, transgender folk were not necessarily welcome in those spaces. But those were imperfect allies that could fight and work together towards this one goal of increased acceptance for the queer community and an end to these police raids and these crimes that criminalized our identities and who we are. So that's a historical example of where imperfect allies came together to build this community, to build this space of belonging to achieve an end. A more recent example that we did here in Lane County for the Trans Alliance of Lane County is we worked alongside a wide coalition of folks to try and get the Lane County Board of Commissioners to affirm the continuation of gender-affirming care as well as protections for immigrant people and transgender people here in Lane County. And to do that, we drew on a wide variety of imperfect allies, some of whom did not understand trans identity, some of whom may have used the wrong words on occasion, but all of whom had that same goal of wanting to build a world and a county where we all feel that sense of belonging. And that's really what this is all about. It's kind of like, why do we do the DEI work? Why is belonging so important? And that's because liberation for one group is often liberation for other groups. The same things that allow one group to feel safe, welcomed, and feel that sense of belonging, those conditions will also have the same impact on other groups who are in that space. And that intersectionality is critical. This is one of many reasons why a lot of my queer brothers, sisters, and siblings will fight for things like the rights of Palestinians in Gaza during the genocide. This is why people in my community will fight for the immigrant community as well, because these attacks on those communities are also attacks on our community, and we need that collective sense of belonging. As far as local government goes, the way local government can help build this, one of the most important ways is by involving those voices at the table. It is essential to have marginalized people not just involved in a recommendation process, but involved in actual decisions. Unfortunately, both the City of Eugene and also the county have lots of public boards that have the ability to make recommendations. I was recently at a police commissioner meeting a few weeks ago, criticizing some of the policy recommendations made around flock, as well as interactions with the ICE enforcement around our community. And unfortunately, the police commission does not have the ability to create actionable, enforceable requirements that the police must follow. They can merely recommend. And the way that this city and this community can improve on DEI and really make that mean something in this present day and age is by inviting marginalized groups, not just trans people, not just white trans women like myself, but people of color, immigrants, people who have intersectional identities, BIPOC trans folk, people who are queer, people who come from other countries, inviting them into these spaces to not make recommendations, but to actually make decisions, decisions that the city and the county has to follow. And that's how the city and the county can do that. Activists, we're just there to kind of push that needle a little bit. So ultimately, imperfect allies, that's something that if everyone in this room takes nothing away from this today, I invite you all to ask yourself how you can be the best imperfect ally to those marginalized groups that you encounter in your own sphere, knowing that you may make mistakes, knowing that you'll be accountable for those mistakes, that you'll get better, and that you'll support how you can, and that support will take the form of giving a platform and giving power, actual power, to those marginalized people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will begin our Q&A quite soon, but first a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station KLCC for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. In Eugene, they broadcast on 89.7 FM. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning in to City Club on KLCC, benefiting from Tom Gilly's editing work, and we're truly honored to have you. We can also find all recent City Club programs archived at klcc.org, as well as on our YouTube channel and the City Club of Eugene podcast. I hope you think of some wonderful questions. We'll have a short break before returning to get those answered. Thank you.
We are going to start our Q&A in just 1 minute, so if you'd like to ask questions, please start lining up.
Testing. 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 I think that's better. Test again. Test with no cover. I don't think it matters. I don't think this cover does anything. I think so.
Hi everyone, we are going to start our Q&A on today's topic, Finding Imperfect Allies, the Future of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Work. If you'd like to ask questions to our guest speakers, Dr. Remy Kalalang and Anna Lardner, please line up here, use the microphone. We ask that you stay close to the microphone.
Trans community should be paid for by government funding or even supported in any way, from a societal standpoint. And they might want to ask that they be represented on those organizations that have power also. Would you support that?
This is Anna. Thank you for that question, Eric. That's a great question. I am totally supportive of having groups from all kinds of backgrounds involved in those organizations, and actually think that that's one of the best ways to help increase understanding and foster imperfect allyship with some of those folks. Sadly, we live in a country that is both politically very divided, but also just divided in terms of our proximity to one another. A lot of our communities are online. We tend not to know people of different groups. I'm always shocked when I talk with people and I introduce myself and I talk a little bit about my history as a trans woman, and I hear comments such as, "I've never met a trans woman before, you're actually pretty nice." So I think it's really important that we bridge some of those barriers in spaces that are low enough stakes where we can foster relationships, and also high enough stakes where power can actually happen and decisions can get made. So one of the worst places to foster these kinds of relationships would be in the sound bites that happen in just, if we had someone come up here and maybe ask a much more pointed question that was full of assumptions about trans people, that's not necessarily trying to foster a relationship or understanding. It's more of just kind of a soundbite moment right there. But that is someone who I'd be more than happy to go out to coffee with and talk to. And that's the way that we can actually start building up these spaces of belonging. I think the challenge here, which I think gets to some of the tension that you're describing, is that we also want to be careful with platforming certain ideologies that are sort of overtly hateful in a way that the extreme right wing has weaponized First Amendment protections in order to promote very much damaging and dangerous white nationalist ideology. And that's the tricky balance right here. But I think for the most part, I do agree that we should have open representation on city groups that have this kind of power, and that by putting those folks into the same room as someone who is a different background, we would actually increase understanding and increase belonging for both parties in a way that would likely help our entire local environment break down some of those barriers. So thank you for asking that. Did you want to have any thoughts?
No, I think.
Hello, Nancy Buffum, City Club member. First, I would just like to respond to what Anna said about getting people in the same room, because I think that the advocacy that the Trans Alliance and their Imperfect Allies did at the county commissioners was a really good example of getting people in the same room. I watched and listened to a lot of that. So that was a really excellent example of having people hear each other that might not have. But my question is about the schools. I'm a little more familiar with 4J than I am with Bethel, but I was wondering if you could say something about the young people in our school system, the high school students and the young teenagers who are from immigrant families and some of whom are unaccompanied minors, and just give an example of, some kind of example of what this means to people. Anonymize it as much as you need to, just so people can get an idea of the sort of like the real poignant place that this affects individuals. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Nancy. I'm happy to talk about that. I mean, it's not the greatest topic, but so we do. We have in Bethel schools and probably across Lane County, roughly 30% of our students probably and families fall into this category of being immigrant family, at least, with various families and the students having like this just different, a mix of who may or may not have documentation, who may or may not have, may have been born in the U.S., even siblings. So some may have been born, some may have come across with their parents if they were a little bit older. So that exists, and so that is something that we also navigate with our families and students. Is like we just can't assume just by looking at a student, looking at their last name, looking at their background, where they were born. We don't make any assumptions. So that's number one. Is just the student or the family comes in and we meet them where they're at. So and Nancy's question is around. So there are high school students who may be unaccompanied, and just to back this up. Lots of our school districts in Lane County, when the orders were coming through around increasing immigration enforcement, removing the protected status of schools and courtyard and hospitals and courthouses, there began to be some conversation around this. And for many of us who've been in education for 30 years or so, this is like the third or fourth time we've had this conversation. So this is not new. Some of us were like, oh, here we go again. Like we remember this back in 1990 something. And so part of that, when these orders were coming through, part of our conversation was really about what do we need to do as a system to prepare for this. So part of that was engaging with our families who may be affected by these orders, in particular the deportation and the immigration orders, was to give them some tools on how to prepare. And so building up their awareness. Here's your rights. So, there's little red cards. Here are your rights. If you get stopped, here are your rights. Here's what you can ask, what you don't ask. But then also part of that was, if these orders may or may not affect you, let's put together some documents so that if for some reason your family, parts of your family are separated, we know you can take some steps to prepare. Get all the birth certificates together, get all the bank statements together, like get all that information together. Who has authority to make decisions on behalf of your child if you are not there to pick them up? Are your emergency contacts in our system updated so that we know who to contact if something happens? So that part of that preparation, that was 4J, Springfield, Lane ESD, like lots of our schools, Siuslaw school districts came together and did that work together to prepare. And so we call those our family preparedness packets. And we got those out, we held events for those. For some students though, and I think that to your point, Nancy, like they enter in our system, they're unaccompanied youth. We are obligated to enroll them and to support them. They may qualify for federal McKinney-Vento, so there's the federal McKinney-Vento Act that unaccompanied youth qualify for. We don't ask about citizenship. We don't ask for a birth certificate. We ask for documentation around how old they are, and we confirm that, and then we enroll them at the high school, and we can do some follow-up later. But the important thing is that we want that student or that youth engaged in our system and supported. And so they meet with a counselor, they meet with support systems, they meet with a McKinney-Vento person to make sure, do you have stable housing? Do you have access to food? Do you have access to resources? So that student will come in, and then within our system, as a part of that family preparedness practice, we had that conversation around how do we prepare our families, how we prepare our system. And part of that was if a student comes in, they may or may not have documentation, or they may or may not have access to an adult, we pair them up with an adult in our system, right? Like, so that might be our social workers, that might be our Bethel Health Center, that might be our McKinney-Vento person, it might be our school counselor. And we ensure that that student has access to education, and uninterrupted access to education. And so, again, there's lots of check-ins, it's what we call wraparound support. We don't leave them alone unless we know for certain that we have a warm handoff to somebody else. And we work darn hard to find, is there another person in a family neighbor, a family friend, a neighbor, a distant relative, who can also be that contact for that youth, so they're not alone. Is that, yeah, okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Devin Lawson. I'm a community member, also a member of the LGBTQ+ community. I do a lot of work of policy in the K-12 and higher education arena. I'm wondering, considering the attacks that we've seen from our federal government, this question is for the both of you, regarding trans policy, what needs the most support from our community, and how might that be implemented in the K-12 arena? I'm assuming you could specifically talk about Bethel.
Sure.
Thank you.
Go first. So thank you for that. What needs the most support? Truthfully, I mean, this is kind of, I don't know, this may be glib. There's so much social media stuff out there, and I think that one of the challenges for school districts is that we can't always get on social media and respond. That's not the place where we would enter. And so sometimes, we were just having this conversation around a variety show that are gay straight alliances, middle school and high school gay straight alliances. We have them in all of our schools and have for several years in our schools. And so they were putting on a variety show, and it got a little bit of social media attention, and and then there were some conversations around that, and there was some internal work that we had to do to ensure that this was going to be a safe opportunity for students to just be. It was just an opportunity. Honestly, it was just an opportunity for these adolescents to get on stage and be goofy kids among supportive peers and their families and invited friends, and it was absolutely delightful to see. But when those things come outside of schools, and we're trying to hold that space for these youth and these families to be who they are, without it having to be always about their identity, they just wanted to be goofy kids who sang songs. It didn't have to be about, oh my gosh, it was the trans kid who was doing that, or that's not material. It was just an opportunity for them. But it became this something else a little bit on social media. And I think sometimes for me, like policy, we have lots of policies that govern how we operate in schools. Like, we have gender inclusive policies, we have every student belongs policy, we have anti-bullying policies. And yes, there's policy and then there's implementation. But sometimes what gets muddy and murky is that stuff outside of schools that takes it and changes what it was intended to be to something. It's not political. Educating students is not political. Students being who they are and feeling a sense of belonging and being included and welcomed in our schools, that's not political. But then when it becomes this political thing, and we do lots of that. I can't tell you how many one-on-one conversations our superintendent has engaged in, or our communications director has engaged in, or our principals. Again, trying to affirm what we're doing. But there is that noise, and I'm always like, if there's somebody else out there who can say, hey, no, this isn't it, like engage in that or just tamp it down, that's always, I think that's something that's helpful for us. And then also just supporting your schools in general. Anything that you could do to support our schools, I think is useful and helpful.
This is Anna. Thanks for that question, Devin. That's a great question. I think for the first part of the policy piece, I would really emphasize that young people need a space where they can safely play with and experiment pronouns and names, free of reprisals that might happen outside of an educational institution. So if you have a young person who comes to class and says, hey, my pronouns are they, them, just accepting that, allowing that to be a space. And it's no coincidence that one of the main policy pushes against this is notification of parents when this happens. When that happens, young people who have reason to fear coming out in their home will be silent, and they will not have an opportunity to explore their gender and what that means. And unfortunately, that has a very chilling effect on young people. So policies that protect the ability of kids to talk about that in a school setting are very important. The other thing I think from just like an educational curriculum policy thing that's important to remember is there is a push in right-wing media, and particularly in this administration, that the idea of trans young people and transgender identity is somehow new. And it's not. It's been around for thousands of years. We have documented history of it going very, very far back. We have written accounts, hundreds of written accounts of conquistadors from Spain and Portugal coming over into native communities and talking about these heathens, these heretics who were dressing in the wrong clothes and having the wrong roles and how they need to be burned and killed. This has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. And from an educational standpoint, it would be amazing if our policies about what curriculum gets taught would help young people understand that your identity as a trans person, as a gay person, as a marginalized person is not new. There's a rich history that underlines that identity. So I think that's another policy piece that I would focus on. I hear this idea that, like what happens in the schools isn't political. And I also am like, it's all political. It's the activist in me. We always think like that. But that education piece is important because it's not a coincidence that the current right-wing push is to erase that history. Because if you can erase that history, you can make people feel very alien and other for thinking and feeling something and thinking they're the only person that's ever felt this in the history of the world, when in reality, this dates back as far as we have records.
I'm Jensina Hawkins, a community member. My question is primarily for Anna. I have met trans women before, but as an activist, you're pretty nice. My question is, I feel privileged that several of my friends feel comfortable sharing their identities with me, but I know that sometimes we're in rooms where other people aren't aware of those. What is the best way to defend or protect these people without outing them or othering them?
This is Anna. Thanks for that question, Jensina. I'm nice in this space. I'd be less nice if you were an ICE agent in the process of abducting someone. So I appreciate you saying that, though. It's a really great question. I think this gets back to a point that both of us have talked about, which is that too often marginalized people get viewed as monoliths. And even in my own comments, I may have fallen victim to this. It's easy to do for any of us, imperfect allies. And I think it's important to allow individuals to actually tell those stories, but that gets to the distinction that I talked to when I was discussing the county about being proactive versus reactive. So if I'm speaking with someone who I know maybe with me uses certain pronouns and has a certain gender identity, and I know that we're going to go in public spaces together, I am going to proactively reach out to that person and say, hey, I am expecting this might come up. How would you like me to handle this? Here's maybe what I've thought of doing. What do you think of that? So it shows that you've done the work, you've thought about this, you're not just asking them for the answers, but you're still honoring what their desire is. And this could be true for all kinds of identities out there. This can be true particularly in Oregon for our BIPOC friends and family, that if we're taking them to a space or we're going to a space where they may be in the minority, acknowledging that, saying, hey, this might be uncomfortable for you. Maybe it's not, maybe I'm just saying that, but I'm worried that this might be uncomfortable for you. If this comes up, what's the best way that I can be an ally for you? Here's something that I've thought of doing. What do you think about that? And that could be a really, really helpful way to help them have a voice, but also show that you have done some work in advance and aren't just putting it on them to give you the answers.
I'll ask you a question about funding for DEI work, and we may have time for a few more brief questions and answers from the audience. Remy, you mentioned some mandates that the state of Oregon has for school districts. Some mandates exist also for local government when they're doing planning. they have to conduct some DEI work. If the current situation evolves, federal funding may be suspended for those initiatives. How could we coordinate conversations with the community if it comes to that point when people have to decide, should we abandon our DEI commitments and local policies so we do not lose federal funding? How is the school district or how are community organizations preparing for that kind of conversation?
Thank you. This is Remy. Where are the educators in the room? I see Anselmo. I see, yep, I see some educators, longtime educators. Here's the thing. Funding cuts in K-12 public education, not new. Not new. And yet here we are, we still continue to educate on children. So I recognize, we recognize, I should say we, educators recognize, like, this is, it just means we get creative. It means that we find imperfect allies, right? That we bring folks in. So we may not have enough folks to help with our homegrown mentoring program. So then we partner with an outside agency or outside partners to provide some mentoring and support. Or we may not have enough counselors. So then who are those organizations out there? Are we thinking about what happens when title funds, federal title funds go away? Yes. The big hit, though, will be our nutrition services program and our transportation programs. That's millions and millions of dollars. There just isn't a way to replace that unless the state of Oregon comes through. And the state of Oregon continues to improve their funding model to support schools. So I applaud our legislators and the governor for that continued work and focus. But it also means that we may need to do more. I know that there's also local option levies that exist, and I know 4J has that. That's not always the option for many of our communities. And that sometimes also has disparate impact on the community trying to fund those and pay for that. But I think it means we get a little more creative in how we do the work and finding those partners, because I don't know that there's anything more than that, but I think if you've been in education for many years, you just know it's just like, okay, how are we going to do it this year?
Very quick response. This is Anna. I love this idea of levies. I love the idea also of progressive levies that don't target everyone equally, but target people who maybe have more to give. There's a difference between someone who owns a house and it's been in their family for a long time and they're still paying off the mortgage and they just don't have the extra money. And then there's people with multiple houses that are managed by property management companies, and those people can pay more. And those people should pay more. And I think this gets to the DEI belonging conversation, but Imperfect Allies is explaining why it's valuable to the community as a whole for you to pay more when you have that money, how this actually improves the community and helps you and helps your family and helps those who are invested in the community have a better experience being a member of where we live. And the last thing I would point to is some of the public safety expenditure recently has been very out of alignment with both the community's priorities, but also the impacts we've seen. It's really unfortunate for
the federal government over DEI programs. Why don't we just title our programs, quote, MAGA Christian programs, and we're going to welcome the immigrant, the poor, the stranger, right down the list, and nothing that they could argue with. That's creative.
I love that creative idea. Yes, and. I mean, I think I appreciate that. And I think this idea of, like, I will say this, like, did we change some of our language? Yes. So do we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion? Yes, but we also are focusing on belonging, engagement, and inclusion. Because ultimately, that is under all those words, that's the experience, that's what we want for our students to have in our schools. But I do like that, that's an idea.
And we have time for just one more question.
Hi, John Barry, City Club member. Thank you very much for your talks. I question this concept of imperfect ally is new to me, so my question's on that term, quite independent of any underlying discussion. Is there such a thing as a perfect ally? Wouldn't that be a member of your community? If there is such a thing, what's the definition? If there's not, why use that adjective?
This is Anna. Thank you, John. That's a great question. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect ally at all. I think the reason we use the word imperfect ally is to get people to embrace the fact that their imperfection is okay and acceptable. By making that explicit, we invite the imperfection, whereas when we just say ally, it remains in our head, maybe I'm not the best ally. Maybe I could be better. Maybe I could be a more perfect ally. But when we say imperfect ally, we acknowledge we're all sort of imperfect allies in our own ways, but we make it explicit. We make it welcome. We make it something that's expected, that when you come here and you're my ally on certain issues, you're an imperfect ally, just like I'm going to be an imperfect ally on issues when it comes to things that improve and elevate your community. But we've made it explicit, and that means that it's okay, and that means that it's something that we're willing to adopt and accept.
Thank you. And I love this term, and I'm going to now quote you. I'm going to because it's this idea of it's growth mindset. It's growth. I think it's very easy for lots of us who are sort of a liberal bend to sort of say, well, I've got this. I agree. I'm with you. And I think there's always moments of growth. There's always going to be those tension points, and we just have to acknowledge that I will say and do something that will likely offend Anna at some point, and that's okay, right? Well, not okay, but it's in the sense of I'm imperfect, and I know she accepts that imperfection of me, right? And I think that's the idea. It builds those relationships, and it doesn't mean that that any one person has arrived in doing the work that supports inclusion and belonging for our community members and for our students.
Thank you for your questions, and thanks Anna and Remy for joining us today. Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. How about one more time for Remy Callalang and Anna Lardner? This has been our July 25th, 2025 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. As we do each year, we'll be taking August off, so please come see us again on September 5th at Wow Hall for our next program, an interview with former City Club President and current Eugene Mayor Karin Knudsen. With so much happening in Eugene, I'm excited to hear her remarks and your opportunity to ask questions. It's sure to be a great forum. We're looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you all. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time at the City Club.